Rain drums on the tin roof, and diesel hangs by the humming generators. Staff Sergeant Jordan Hale, of the United States Army, settles beside her M2010 Enhanced Sniper Rifle, chambered in .300 Winchester Magnum. She finds natural point of aim, checks parallax, and smooths the trigger wall with a dry press. She lays out a neat line of gear and keeps her breathing steady. On the AN/PRC 117G net, operations relays a hold fire call from Major Eric Stanton. A Navy SEAL element led by Lieutenant Mason Clark moves through wet trees, while Jordan uses the thermal clip-on only as a cue and returns to the day optic for identification. She confirms the sling tension and the bubble level, then lets the reticle settle through the range shimmer and keeps her trigger finger indexed. Authority is clear. The ground force commander is Lieutenant Mason Clark, and only he can clear to engage once geometry is safe. 12 lives move in her sightline, and the storm feels closer. If I stop, they die, sits behind her teeth and will not leave. Jordan sets her cheek weld, eases the safety, holds her exhale, and waits at the edge of the first shot. Rain taps the canvas walls while the lights buzz over a damp map table. 12 Navy SEALs under Lieutenant Mason Clark ring the laminate surface with quiet boots and still hands. Noise discipline holds like a grip, and the room breathes in short, steady pulls. Captain Rachel Nguyen runs the Tactical Operations Center nets on the AN/PRC 117G from a nearby console. Her voice is low, and even as she confirms checks and keeps the channels clean. Outside, generators carry the smell of diesel through the seams of the tent. Lieutenant Mason Clark briefs the route along ridgelines and narrow draws. He sets movement spacing, sectors, and a pace plan with primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency nets. MGRS grids mark phase lines and release points, and each pause matches landmarks to the map. He covers a short medevac plan with pickup criteria and the nearest surgical support. Radio brevity is restated, so reports carry grid, distance, direction, and effect. Heads nod once, then lift to watch the rain pattern at the door. Major Eric Stanton asserts the area is low threat and advises hold fire until there is positive identification under the rules of engagement. The guidance is calm and certain from a dry desk. Boots at the table shift, but the discipline stays firm. Staff Sergeant Jordan Hale listens and writes small notes. Iraq taught her to read alleys before footsteps formed, and Afghanistan taught her to track wind seams across rock and heat. The silence after a lost spotter still weighs more than gear. The brief closes with a clear chain of authority. The ground force commander is Lieutenant Mason Clark, and only he can clear to engage after geometry is deconflicted. The Tactical Operations Center confirms policy and can lift a hold if needed, while ground truth waits outside the wire. Under a dry awning, Staff Sergeant Jordan Hale of the United States Army lays out her kit in a clean left-to-right grid. The M2010 Enhanced Sniper Rifle, chambered in .300 Winchester Magnum, rests on a shooting mat while rain patters beyond the concrete edge. A rigid tripod is planted deep, and the rifle is clamped into a hog saddle with the bipod folded as backup. She locks her focus on safety first. Bolt to the rear, chamber clear. Then she seats a 5-round magazine, runs the action, and performs a careful press check. Sling tension comes next to tame recoil and hold the body to the rifle without strain. Jordan pulls out the Kestrel 5700 and reads temperature, pressure, and a light crosswind. She notes the data on a dope card secured to an armboard at her wrist and never on the sling. A lens cloth wipes the glass clean, desiccant slides into the pouch, and turret caps are closed to fight moisture. She builds position with natural point of aim and checks the bubble level until it sits true. Parallax is dialed out while her cheek weld settles into the stock, and a dry press confirms a smooth trigger wall. The thermal clip-on will be used only as a cue, and all positive identification will occur through the day optic, per the rules of engagement. Wind calls start modest at plus 0.2 mil for a 2 to 3 knot crosswind in heavy air. She plans to bump to plus 0.3 mil if gusts rise toward 4 or 5. A narrow strip of tape on the buttstock reads, "Never miss twice," a quiet reminder that sits where only she will see. Rain pounds the tent roof, while lantern light spreads across the laminate map. Lieutenant Mason Clark stands steady and outlines the route along ridgelines and narrow draws. He sets movement spacing, sector arcs, and a clean cadence for halts, so the element stays quiet and controlled. Clark builds the pace plan with primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency nets. He marks MGRS grids for phase lines and release points, tying each to a terrain feature for quick orientation. Brevity words are kept simple, so every call carries grid, distance, direction, and effect. He briefs a short medevac plan with pickup criteria, casualty roles, and the nearest surgical support. Contingencies cover choke points and dead ground where visibility collapses. The team checks acknowledgements and traces the path with gloved fingers on the plastic surface. Rules of engagement are restated without drama. Positive identification must occur through the day optic before any round leaves the chamber, and thermal is only a cue to guide the eye. The ground force commander is Lieutenant Mason Clark, and he alone clears to engage once geometry and backstop are safe. Captain Rachel Nguyen manages the Tactical Operations Center nets on the AN/PRC 117G and confirms policy. She can lift a hold from the center if needed, but she does not issue cleared to engage. Major Eric Stanton adds that the area trends low threat and advises hold fire until identification is certain. Staff Sergeant Jordan Hale notes the MGRS blocks, updates her dope, and lets the rain set the room to a professional calm. Rain slicks the ramp as the Navy SEAL element under Lieutenant Mason Clark slips past the wire. Spacing opens between operators. Sectors lock like gears, and every head turn is measured. Light and noise discipline hold as boots test routes and wet rock before committing weight. Gloved fingers shape hand signals that travel down the line. Muzzles stay off mud, optics kept dry under hoods, and shoulders settle when the column pauses to listen. A heel shifts a single inch to clear a route. Then the file moves again with the rain for cover. Lieutenant Mason Clark, as ground force commander, regulates pace and direction while keeping the route inside the plan. The element breathes as one and rides the contour, using brief halts to reset arcs and confirm bearings. No one speaks, and the forest gives back only water and leaf noise. Up on the north slope, Staff Sergeant Jordan Hale climbs to an Overwatch that mirrors the movement corridor. She keys a short comms check on the AN/PRC 117G, confirms the primary net from the pace plan, and falls quiet. Her job is observation and talk on when needed, and she lets the reticle drift with the wind to map the ground below. The team fades into the trees until rain is louder than gear. Small checks repeat like a rhythm. The muzzles remain clean, the intervals stay honest, and the jungle accepts them just enough to let them pass. Staff Sergeant Jordan Hale of the United States Army slips into a shallow fold on the north slope where brush breaks the outline. The hide gives cover from above and concealment from the valley. A clean lane opens toward the ground where the Navy SEAL element will pass. She plants the tripod legs deep until they bite and clamps the M2010 Enhanced Sniper Rifle in a hog saddle. The bipod stays folded as backup. Sling tension settles the rifle into her frame to control recoil without strain. Jordan finds natural point of aim by closing her eyes, breathing twice, and letting the reticle return to center. The bubble level sits true. She dials parallax until the target and reticle track together when her eye shifts. The Kestrel 5700 comes out of a pocket with a dry snap. Temperature, pressure, and a light crosswind populate the screen and move to a dope card on an armboard at her wrist. Elevation is set for about 920 meters, with a starting wind hold of plus 0.2 mil. She plans for gusts. If the air bumps to 4 or 5 knots in the wet, she will move to plus 0.3 mil. The goal is to stay ahead of the wind rather than chase misses. A thermal clip-on clicks to white hot, only to cue shapes through the rain haze. She returns to the day optic for positive identification, in line with the rules of engagement. Glass is wiped once, and the caps are checked for moisture. Breathing smooths to a metronome. A dry press confirms a clean trigger wall. Then she resets and rechecks parallax after each small change. The AN/PRC-117G stays quiet except for brief comms checks inside the pace plan. Her cheek weld sets and the reticle holds still through the shimmer. Dope is ready and the hide feels settled. She waits for the ground force commander, Lieutenant Mason Clark, to confirm geometry and backstop before any shot leaves the chamber. The thermal clip-on glows white-hot and shows shapes that move with purpose. Staff Sergeant Jordan Hale of the United States Army uses it only as a cue, then settles behind the day optic to confirm positive identification. The lane below fills slowly with pairs that bound and pause, and the pattern grows too clean to be weather. She counts 2, then 6, then more as intervals hold steady across the slope. Spacing and timing look trained, not random. The glass stays calm while rain blurs the edges, and the reticle returns to center after each blink. Jordan keys the AN/PRC-117G and sends a short report with call sign, MGRS grid, estimated size, movement direction, and a warning that the corridor is tightening on the Navy SEAL element, led by Lieutenant Mason Clark. The wording stays clear and simple, so no one guesses under stress. She releases the push to talk and listens to the net settle. Inside the Tactical Operations Center, Major Eric Stanton dismisses the call as moisture bloom from the rain. Captain Rachel Wynn keeps the channel open, asks for continued observation, and tags the feed for ISR comparison. The tent noise fades, and the room waits for the next clean update. Pressure builds in the quiet, and Jordan lets discipline hold it. She checks the Kestrel 5700, notes a light crosswind, and updates the dope card on the armboard. She keeps her rifle still, watches the pattern shape the ground truth, and waits for the ground force commander to confirm safe geometry before any shot is taken. Rain explodes through the canopy, and the line of fire cuts from 2 sides. The Navy SEAL element under Lieutenant Mason Clark takes enfilade across wet trunks and rock. Clark calls contact left and contact right, then drags a casualty into cover and starts bleeding control. He pushes a sitrep with a clean MGRS grid and a quick read of enemy fire. Smoke blooms to break angles, and short bounds try to reset sectors. The volume does not let go, and the team holds low. On the ridge, Staff Sergeant Jordan Hale of the United States Army rolls from thermal cue to the day optic. Shapes harden into details as the glass settles. The pattern is trained and closing. She picks out an RPG team hunting a lane. A belt-fed gun anchors suppression on a narrow lip, and 2 runners are feeding belts forward. The picture locks to terrain and distance. Jordan keys the AN/PRC-117G and sends brevity only, grid, distance, direction, and a target description go to Lieutenant Mason Clark so he can shift without guessing. The net clears and the team inches to a safer line. At the Tactical Operations Center, Captain Rachel Wynn keeps the channel open and watches ISR for pattern match. Major Eric Stanton leans to hold fire without positive identification. The rain swallows the gap between screens and the trees. Authority remains clear in the chaos. The ground force commander is Lieutenant Mason Clark, and he controls movement and fires. He snaps short orders to cut the enemy rhythm, resets sectors, and keeps the element aligned. The pressure peaks and the air feels tight enough to ring. The element is still pinned in the enfilade. Calm reports from Jordan and steady command from Clark set the conditions for the next decision under the rules of engagement and safe geometry. Staff Sergeant Jordan Hale of the United States Army holds the glass steady and waits for confirmation. Positive identification comes through the day optic, clean and certain against the wet slope. Lieutenant Mason Clark confirms safe geometry as ground force commander, and the backstop is good. Jordan glances at the Kestrel 5700 and notes a light crosswind. She sets a wind hold at plus 0.2 mil for 2 to 3 knots and rechecks elevation for about 920 meters. Breathing settles to a calm cadence. Shot 1 is for the RPG gunner moving into a firing lane. She exhales to the natural brake, presses straight to the rear, and holds the sight picture through recoil. The upper torso hit stops the launch and keeps the corridor from flashing. She rides the bolt forward and shifts to the assistant feeding the team. The reticle finds the rib line and she repeats the cycle with the same quiet pace. Follow-through holds until the image returns and the lane loosens another inch. Wind bumps in the rain and she adjusts. The hold clicks to plus 0.3 mil for 4 to 5 knots in heavy air. She confirms level and parallax and keeps the sling tight. The third shot threads the seam that anchors a belt-fed gun. She waits for the lull, presses smooth, and lets the reticle settle back on the barricade as the suppressive fire fades. The element below can breathe again. She performs a clean reload without haste. The 5-round magazine comes out. A fresh magazine seats, a press check verifies, and the bolt goes forward. She confirms level and parallax again before returning to glass. Jordan keys the AN/PRC-117G and keeps brevity tight with grid, distance, and direction so Lieutenant Mason Clark can shift the element without guessing. No tracer marks the ground. There will be no shots while aircraft run guns later, only disciplined fires when the net and the geometry agree. Rain softens to a steady hiss while Staff Sergeant Jordan Hale of the United States Army settles behind glass. She keeps the thermal clip on as a cue only, then lives in the day optic for positive identification. Her voice on the AN/PRC-117G is calm and clipped, built for clarity. She starts with MGRS grid, then distance and direction, and she paints the ground with simple anchors. A fallen tree splits the slope, and a low bunker caps a shallow rise. A narrow cut in the slope becomes a funnel that can guide the element without a tracer. Jordan keeps brevity tight and leaves room for the ground force commander, Lieutenant Mason Clark, to control movement and fires. She offers boundaries, not commands, and guards the safety picture with each word. Backstop and angles stay in her head as she shapes the lane. She gives a clean call that shifts the element 25 meters to the right on her brake. The pause that follows becomes a hold so a casualty can settle in deeper cover and sectors can reset. Another short call moves the file on her mark and the corridor begins to show itself in the rain. At the Tactical Operations Center, Captain Rachel Nguyen watches ISR tracks and sees the path grow where none existed a minute before. Jordan updates ranges, restates friendlies north and south by exact counts, and keeps geometry safe, while Clark retains the cleared to engage authority. The line on the ground can now start to withdraw by segments and still hold discipline of fire and radio, and the forest finally gives them a narrow way out. Rain beats the concrete roof of the Tactical Operations Center and turns the doorway into a gray sheet. Captain Rachel Nguyen watches the ISR feed crawl across her screens and listens to the AN/PRC-117G net. She matches each report from Staff Sergeant Jordan Hale to tracks that move with intent. Major Eric Stanton holds to the early call of low threat and argues for a continued hold fire. The data says otherwise. The pattern tightens along the route of the Navy SEAL element, led by Lieutenant Mason Clark, and begins to close the gap. Rachel keeps her voice level and frames the problem in mission language. Thermal is a cue only, and Jordan has positive identification through the day optic with grids, distances, and directions that align with ISR. The picture supports an immediate policy change without breaking the rules of engagement. She outlines the authority chain so no one confuses roles. The Tactical Operations Center does not issue cleared to engage. The center can lift the hold, restate the rules of engagement, and pass full engagement authority to the ground force commander once geometry and backstop are deconflicted by him. The order goes out across the net in plain words. Hold is rescinded, rules of engagement remain in effect, and the ground force commander, Lieutenant Mason Clark, retains cleared to engage in movement control. Acknowledge calls return fast and clean. The room exhales without losing focus and the radios sound brighter. Outside, rain keeps the tempo while icons on the screen begin to drift apart. Jordan tightens her process, checks the Kestrel 5700 for a fresh wind line, rechecks level and parallax, and waits to execute under the ground force commander. Rain hangs over the canopy as an AH-64 Apache flight checks in on the net. Staff Sergeant Jordan Hale of the United States Army steadies her breathing and takes the radio. She uses the ANPRC 117G with clean brevity and a calm cadence. She starts with an MGRS grid, then distance and direction. A fallen tree marks the left edge, a low bunker pins the far rise, and a narrow cut in the slope makes a funnel. No tracer is needed because the picture is already clear. The pilots confirm positive identification through TADS and read back friendlies south of the target with exact spacing. Jordan repeats the friendlies line one more time so everyone sees the geometry in their heads. The rain becomes a metronome that keeps people honest. Authority is exact and simple. The ground force commander is Lieutenant Mason Clark, and he alone clears to engage once he deconflicts, angles and backstop and checks range to friendlies. Jordan holds her rifle at rest and waits for his call. M230 30mm walks along a trench line and cuts the anchor that has been holding the element under enfilade. The burst is short and precise. Only when angles and backstop are safe does a single AGM-114 Hellfire punch a hard cover node and end the position. During the gun run, Jordan pauses all rifle fire with the M2010 Enhanced Sniper Rifle chambered in .300 Winchester Magnum. She watches for movement with the day optic and uses thermal only as a cue in the rain. As the Apache egresses and the stack resets, she picks up targets that displace from the impact. Airspace stays orderly with a clean stack and firm deconfliction. Altitudes, distances, and timing keep every path separated. The corridor on the ground widens until the radios sound bright and simple again. Jordan confirms the picture and restates geometry. Lieutenant Mason Clark directs the first segment of the element to pull back through the gap in disciplined bounds. The way out now exists because talk-on and air power worked as one. Enemy fire thins after the Apache close combat attack, and the valley sounds like rain again. The corridor that talk-on and precise shots carved now shows through broken brush and wet rock. Staff Sergeant Jordan Hale of the United States Army breathes once and resets her process. She checks the Kestrel 5700 for a new wind line and updates the dope on her armboard. Elevation stays true on the dial, while level and parallax are verified before she returns to glass. She will only fire once the Navy SEAL element is set, and Lieutenant Mason Clark gives permission. Her voice stays tight on the AN/PRC-117G to pace the movement without clutter. She calls simple anchors that were briefed earlier, so friendlies stay separated from threat lines. A low bunker, a fallen tree, and a narrow cut in the slope guide each bound. She asks for a hold when a casualty needs a longer drag into cover and waits until sectors are reset. Thermal remains a cue only, and every positive identification is through the day optic. There is no firing during any follow-on gun run or while the element is moving. Lieutenant Mason Clark keeps control of movement and holds cleared to engage authority. The file pulls back a segment at a time, and formation integrity survives each pause. By the time the last pair steps clear, the radios sound bright and the rain becomes only a background beat. Rain eases to a light patter as the convoy rolls through the gate. Wet boots print dark crescents across the concrete of the Joint Task Force compound. The air smells like diesel and damp canvas. Staff Sergeant Jordan Hale of the United States Army spreads a fabric mat and begins a careful field strip of the M2010 Enhanced Sniper Rifle chambered in .300 Winchester Magnum. She cleans the bolt face, dries the chamber, and brushes moisture from the optic. Parts return to place until the final click feels certain. Lieutenant Mason Clark stops beside her with a forearm bandage tucked under a sleeve. The handshake is brief and steady, a quiet exchange of respect. No words are needed in the rain. Inside the equipment bay, the unit comes to attention as Colonel Thomas Avery steps in from the weather. He announces relief of command for Major Eric Stanton for negligence and failure to act on field intelligence, pending a 15-6 investigation. The language is procedural and final, and the room holds still. Captain Rachel Newen and Lieutenant Mason Clark maintain correct bearing while the paperwork is set in motion. Jordan stands with the sling snugged, bolt forward on an empty chamber, and the rifle safe. Rain taps the roof in an even rhythm as the compound returns to work. The floor dries in streaks where footsteps fade. Voices move back to task lists and checks. The weapon sits in order, and so do the people, return to principle after a hard day. Late afternoon softens the red clay at Fort Moore, formerly Fort Benning, as wind slips across the berms. Staff Sergeant Jordan Hale of the United States Army walks the firing line with an easy steadiness. She starts at the feet and works up to knees, hips, shoulders, and finally the head. She shows how to build natural point of aim so the reticle returns to center without effort. Cheek weld is set so the eye finds the same picture every time. Breathing runs in a simple loop that starts calm and stays calm. Jordan lifts her armboard so students can see the dope card taped to her wrist. She reads the Kestrel 5,700 for temperature, pressure, and wind, then turns those numbers into practical holds they can remember. Pens make small notes on range cards that will live with the rifle. Thermal is discussed only as a cue when humidity blurs detail. Positive identification belongs to the day optic before any round leaves the chamber under the rules of engagement. The habit is simple and it saves people. She has them check the bubble level, then dial parallax until reticle and target move together. Breathe to the natural break. Press straight to the rear, and hold the sight picture through follow-through. Students watch wind push, splash, and learn to correct without chasing misses. One student asks how to stand firm when a decision feels wrong. Jordan answers like a mentor who has been outside the wire. Use what you see, what you know, and what your conscience can carry, but move inside the correct authority chain and within the rules of engagement. The line settles into a quiet rhythm as brass rolls in shallow arcs. Jordan closes by reminding them to keep radio discipline, speak with precision, and let restraint lead the shot. The field holds a warm breeze and a calm that was earned. The driveway glistens with rain, and the porch light spills a soft circle on the steps. Lieutenant Mason Clark sets his boots on the mat and feels the tug of a bandage under his sleeve. Rank stays outside as he steps in and folds into a long embrace that lets the house breathe again. A hospital garden holds warm sun and trimmed hedges. Petty Officer Liam Ortiz sits with a notebook and writes a letter he will never send to Staff Sergeant Jordan Hale of the United States Army. He thanks her for trusting ground truth and strict fire discipline that turned fear into a safe lane through the trees. His pages remember a corridor shaped by talk, on, and confirmed by careful shots. He writes that restraint carried more weight than volume, and that people went home because patience held. The pen stops and the quiet feels earned. Inside a calm office at the Tactical Operations Center, Captain Rachel Nguyen reviews after-action notes and ISR captures. She turns field lessons into a document called Overwatch Integrity Protocol and keeps the language clear. Thermal is a cue only. Positive identification happens through the day optic. Talk on follows MGRS with distance and direction, and target sequence goes leadership, then machine guns, then outer flanks to open a corridor. Evening settles on the red clay at Fort Moore, and Jordan wipes a barrel with slow care. Bolt back, chamber clear, optic caps closed, and a small strip of tape on the buttstock reads, "Never miss twice." The range smells like dust and cut grass, and the day finally lets go. Far away, the jungle is quiet after rain. At the old hide, a single brass case rests in wet leaves and mud. It is a small marker for work done with discipline and a steady heart.